Hello, everybody. Welcome back to ADHD Power Tools. Today, as usual, we have Brooke Schnittman with us, but we have a special guest today, the great and powerful Melissa Orlov. Hello, Melissa. Welcome.
Hi,
Thank you.
Melissa.
I love being introduced that way. Thank you.
Well, introduce yourself properly. You do so much in the ADHD space, and just tell us about what you do and who you are.
I work with couples impacted by ADHD. One or the other partner has it, or both sometimes. And I have been doing this for a long time, since 2007. I've written a couple books on it. I give seminars on it. I do support groups for it. So I'm sort of all into ADHD and relationships.
I love recommending people to your group for couples and your book, The ADHD Effect on Marriage. I know you have a couple books, but that one in particularly, I know that my clients really thrive off of.
Thank you. Yeah. I should give my website, ADHDmarriage.com.
Absolutely.
So people can find all the resources because there are a ton of resources there. So that's where I am, and they can contact me also.
I want to ask you, Melissa, I want to ask you, how is your relationship affected if either both the partners have ADHD or just one of them do? And I want to ask you, which do you find more difficult if you do find one more difficult?
You mean having one versus having two?
Mm-hmm.
They're just quite different. So statistically, because there are so many more people who don't have ADHD, what you see most commonly is what I call mixed. One has ADHD, one doesn't. And then if you have a dual ADHD couple, then they have some additional issues around like figuring out how to stay organized and how to be on time and et cetera, because neither one of them has a real strong skill set in that area, often, not always. But so you asked about common issues. So the most common issues include, and the worst one, I think, is what I call parent-child dynamics, where you have one partner who's sort of in control or managing both the relationship and the partner, the other partner, and then you have the other person who's in a kind of a childlike role where they're under-functioning, or where they're, following instructions or retreating because they don't want to engage with somebody that they feel is kind of controlling them or trying to control them. It's very toxic. 99.9% of the couples who contact me have this issue going on. So it's by far the biggest one that I see. And then there's emotional issues and other things.
Melissa, if it's okay, can I, since you brought up statistics, can I throw a curveball at you?
Yeah.
Okay. So, I know what you do is couples coaching, but there's also couples counseling. And what I've read is that 95% of couples who go to couples counseling after there's problems, of course, after there's major problems, don't survive that. So what do you see in your coaching through the tools that you give the couples that come to you?
So I don't see that number. And what I do, I call what I do consulting, because it's a kind of a hybrid between a counseling role and a coaching role.
Right.
So I don't see that. I do see some people don't make it. But what I see more often is that people learn some of the tools. I mean, one of the huge issues with adult ADHD is a lot of it was undiagnosed. And so all these habits developed for these couples, and they had no idea what was going on. And so once you help them learn what's going on and they understand it better, there are lots of changes that they can make in their own behaviors, provided they haven't gone to such an extreme in terms of the anger or the dysfunction or whatever that they're struggling with, that they just can't come back, essentially. So not everybody makes it, but I don't have specific numbers on
Sure.
what happens, but
yeah. And where do you see the most progress with couples who do the work?
In terms of the things that they work on, is that what you're asking? Or
maybe like where they are in their journey with their partner, in their struggles, or perhaps if, how, I know we never have an exact science of how long someone needs to be working with you or in your program, but where do you see the greatest impact?
Well, so there are a couple of factors that have a huge uh, impact on whether or not the couple survives. So I'm going to answer your question that way first.
Sure.
And that is that both partners have to acknowledge that ADHD is in fact playing a role. And that's actually a really big deal because people with ADHD who haven't been diagnosed before sometimes resist that diagnosis. And in a relationship, they may be afraid that if they say, oh yeah, I've got ADHD, that suddenly they are to blame for everything. There's a label.
Sure.
And they don't want to take that blame. So, likewise, non-ADHD partners tend to say, oh, it's all about the ADHD. I don't really have a role. When in fact, they have a big role in terms of how they respond and what they know and how empathetic they are to the struggles of a person who has ADHD. And so the very underpinning, I almost always, if you have one partner who says, I don't play a role in this, then the relationship will fail. Almost always, if they're struggling, because nothing changes. Or
Sure.
more accurately, one person tries, the other person doesn't, and it gets worse because of the resistance. So denial actually is what causes divorce, not ADHD.
I've heard so often, of course, it's an explanation, not an excuse, but I think from some of the neurotypical partners with ADHDers, like how do they know that the person is using it as an explanation and not an excuse? Like there's such a distinction there where, no, this is my ADHD. I'm not trying to make an excuse, doing all these things. But
you can see once you know what's going on. So like, this is what I do in my seminar, right? I teach couples the things they need to do in order to be optimizing how the ADHD is managed and how they interact together. And, they practice the strategies and stuff. You can tell whether somebody is resistant or not. You can tell if somebody creates a plan to try to execute something and still has more difficulty executing it, they're still working at it because they took the time and effort to engage with creating the plan. They may not have figured out all the steps that they need to do yet, but they're engaged. Whereas if they just say, I can't do that, I'm not going to bother to do it, you do it, whatever, they're not engaged. So the excuses come with lack of engagement. I always believe somebody when they say to me, hey, that's just real. I've tried. Here are the 5 things I've done. They didn't work for the following reasons. I believe them. Like, okay, it's no longer an excuse. It's actually, the ADHD is getting in the way. But if they say, oh no, I've never been able to do that. And I'm just always angry. I've always been volatile, as an example. And I hear that relatively regularly. I go, yeah, no, you're not trying. So we're going to work on that. Thank you.
Actions speak louder than words.
Well, and that brings me to the other thing. I said there are a couple of things that have to be in place. The severity of the ADHD does make a difference, and the dimension that it makes a difference on usually is in the emotional dysregulation dimension. If you have somebody who's really, really volatile and does not take responsibility for managing that volatility and calming their input into the relationship, everything is unstable. There's no real platform for the couple to be able to launch from as they try to make repairs. So those are the 2 things that I really impede couples from succeeding, either one of them staying in denial versus learning about it and eventually saying, oh, you know what? Okay, I was resisting this at first, but now I can see how I'm involved, and starting to take on their own stuff. And the other is the volatility. So those 2 things have to be addressed in order for the couple to succeed.
Yeah. And I mean, of course, as ADHDers, we understand the extremity of ADHD, but I feel like to some level, it's a partner being a good partner. Of course, there's that, added layer. Wow, you have ADHD. But regardless if you're neurotypical or not, you have to get to know what works for the partner, right? And what works for you and what their love language is and all of those other features.
Yeah, in theory. But I
In
mean,
theory.
yes, in theory. I mean, there's so much
Sounds good.
complexity to this. But I mean, the bottom line, there is a bottom line. In fact, this is another thing I talk about in my seminar. I sort of give a little like chart, and this is in my book as well, with a line, right? And below the line, you're a terrible partner to anybody in any situation. And then there's this line, which includes things like, respect and the ability to listen to a partner or consider their opinions and, affectionate, some sort signs of affection. There's some basics that you have to have for a healthy relationship. And then above that, everything is great and gravy as far as but you gotta hit the line, and
Sure.
be, basically a good partner. So, but it's harder to be a good partner when ADHD is in the mix. As just one example, one of the foundations of trust is saying you're going to do something and following up and doing it. And that's sometimes really hard for people with ADHD. It's just an added difficulty.
Layer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's the part where it's like, yeah, ADHD can get in the way, but it's hard to communicate that ADHD is getting in the way, communicating your ADHD symptoms to your partner before they can even be supportive to begin with. Do you find that an issue, communicating the ADHD?
Yeah, though once you start talking about, hey, what's your brain feel like? There's some interesting conversations that go on. The bigger challenge is that 80 to 90% of adults with ADHD don't know they have it. It isn't about communicating about the ADHD. It's actually knowing they've got it in the first place. Like, instead of that they're a huge failure or that they never can manage to get things right or whatever the shame story is that they've developed inside themselves to try to make sense of why they keep promising to do something and don't do it, or struggle more than their peers, or whatever it is. So, yeah, I mean, part of the communication issue is on the non-ADHD partners side. Skepticism, Brooke, you talked about, is it an excuse, or I don't remember which one of you did. Yeah, or not. By the time you've been on this rodeo for a while, you are just like, yeah, no, I don't want to hear that anymore. Just fix it. Come on. And until you have the knowledge about what it looks like, how this is why people like my book so much, because the people write to me all the time and say, you made me cry. It was like you were in my living room, but these stories are like predictable, right? The symptoms are set. The responses that the other partner has to that set of symptoms are human responses to that predicament.
Sure.
And so the patterns that develop are actually really predictable. And the good news is that means you can A, identify them, and B, teach people, okay, this is what the pattern's going to look like, and here's what you do to get rid of it or to interfere with it, which is why I really like what I do, as you could tell.